Hey, folks, greetings from the Offensive Security Group here at SecurIT 360, coming at you with a new episode of the Cyber Threat Perspective. You've got myself, Brad, and Spencer here. I'm sure you guys are familiar with us at this point, if you've been following along at all. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a research project that Trend Micro put together. And we're going to kind of be queuing off of a white paper that's called Red Team Tools in the Hands of Cyber Criminals and Nation States. We'll obviously link that in the description so that you guys can go take a look at that for yourself. But what we're really here to talk about are a couple of different aspects of this report. I don't know, Spencer, that the report has anything like groundbreaking or new, or at least that I saw. But it does bring up some interesting conversation points with regards to like what red teaming is, what are red team tools, why are they used, when are they used, et cetera. And it is an interesting thought experiment to talk a little bit about what those red team tools have in play to benefit the bad guys, right? And so this is kind of your brainchild. So do you want to do like an intro to it? I think I may have already stolen half your intro, but
no, that's a perfect introductory to the topic. So this came out like today, I think, or just very recently, and I saw it on Twitter this morning. I was like, oh, that's interesting. So Trend Micro, Trend did research on red team tools. And essentially, they looked at a whole bunch of GitHub repos and kind of did some AI automation, fancy magic stuff to kind of pare down specific repos in specific kind of categories of red team tools to pay attention to and to look at. And so they used, like I said, AI to kind of pare things down and look at tags in GitHub, look at the programming languages. They crawled the README files and did essentially some analysis on it. And they came up with a few categories of red team tools or offensive security tools, or OST as they're commonly referred to. And so this white paper is essentially kind of a diary or a summary of what they did, what their research was about, what they were trying to kind of highlight, and really just offers a good opportunity for us to talk about it in a public forum like this. And they offer some recommendations going forward and some trends to pay attention to. So I think this is ultimately good because this is something that's kind of been talked about for a while on Twitter or X, if you've been following kind of information security, specifically offensive security. I'll just give kind of a quick rundown of what I understand has been the trend lately. And then I do want to just make sure we talk about, Brad, like what is red teaming, and just kind of cover that basic stuff too. Yeah. So don't make it
so
too
before
sidetracked.
You do, I just want to point out the Know Your Tools offensive security shirt that we have here in the team. And for those of you that aren't aware, the background of that is, we take a great deal of pride in understanding the tools that we use. And so, So I thought this would be appropriate for this conversation since we're talking about tooling. So anyway, go ahead.
And that's a custom shirt. That's like one of 6 exist in the whole world. So super cool. So kind of the red team tools. Another name, like I said, that often red team tools are referred to as is OST, or offensive security tools. Now, I haven't been in the game as long as some of the other folks have been. But from what I understand, there's a lot of offensive security research that's happened over the years, right? And at the kind of the advent, I guess, of offensive security tools, you had things like Powersploit, and you had things like Mimikatz and Metasploit. These were very early on in kind of the offensive security world, things that were being researched. And eventually, fast forward to today, a lot of security products are getting really good. We see this on our pen tests all the time, especially internal pen tests. Security products, the EDR products, the monitoring products, they're getting really good at detecting a lot of this low-hanging fruit, a lot of these common attack tools and TTPs. And that's because, a lot of the tools are on GitHub. A lot of people share the tools. And there's a lot of dynamics that go into this. I think there's a little bit of clout chasing when people publish research or attack tools or exploits and things like that. So that's a whole nother dynamic to this too, Brad, which is like clout versus providing value versus like, what are the ethical and moral responsibilities when you have an exploit or you found a vulnerability, and that's a whole can of worms in and of itself. But essentially, to lay the groundwork, these OST tools, these red team tools that are being created by researchers, by pen testers like me and other people, offensive security developers, red teamers, all sorts of people. They're creating tools to help with their engagements, to provide better pen tests, better red teams. And in doing so, a lot of that research they make public. They want the notoriety from it. They want to be known as the person that found this vulnerability or made an exploit for it or the first one to do XYZ thing. So a lot of that stuff gets published publicly. Now, some of it, is back channel communications, Discord servers, private groups, in between peers. But a lot of it over the years has been public. And as of recently, a lot of that stuff is starting to go more private. Like I said, more Discord channels, more back channel communications, private teams, peer communities. So that's kind of just to set the stage a little bit and why this kind of research I think is interesting.
We dealt with this to some degree at OWASP back when I was sitting on the project board. And so anytime someone wanted to release an open source tool or create a project to be funded or whatever by OWASP, it would kind of come through our group. And there were several tools that we felt like were more beneficial to the bad guys, right? And so we were trying to be a little discreet about handling those, right? And so some of them didn't align well with the mission. And so, in a lot of cases, those tools never saw the light of day, not because, they weren't cool, but because we thought that they posed more risk than benefit. And so, yeah, I mean, it is a conversation, right?
Yep.
It's part of a larger conversation.
Yeah, and this research, this white paper by Trend, they propose a kind of methodology, if you will, of triaging these repositories and these red team tools to, one, understand what the tool is, what is the domain, is it for post exploitation, is it command and control, is it recon, that kind of thing, and are there detection opportunities that they can wrap into this? So they have like a whole methodology for this, and it's a really good read. It's a interesting methodology and worthwhile if you're into that kind of thing. So real quick, red teaming, for those who are not familiar or maybe not understand the differences between red teaming and pen testing and all those other things, red teaming is essentially adversary simulation. We are simulating real-world attacks by real-world threat actors. That doesn't mean that they're sophisticated, and it doesn't mean that they're not sophisticated. A lot of times when you do a red team for an organization, the organization has specific goals. Like, we want to start on this DMZ network, and we want you to get to this flag over here on the backup server. There's very specific goals. It's not just a free-for-all and find all the vulnerabilities you can find. It's to simulate real-world attacks. And importantly, a lot of red team exercises are designed to test the blue team just as much as the controls in the environment, right? So that's kind of a red teaming, whereas pen testing is, we have a time-limited engagement. We're going to find as many vulnerabilities as we can that are going to hurt your organization if they're exploited. So just to kind of lay the groundwork on the differences there.
Yep, significant difference. Unfortunately, there's not a central authority for the definition of words in the offensive security, umbrella, and so you get a lot of either ambiguous terms or terms that kind of have double meaning, and so yeah. I mean, we have to have this conversation with folks all the time. But I think the way you've described it is generally the consensus of the industry. And if you speak to someone who lives in our world, they're going to give you roughly the same answer. And
even the words like simulation versus emulation, like a lot of people are very, are very bullish on like the differences between emulation and simulation, right? A lot of red teams will tell you they emulate threats. They don't simulate threats. Simulating, in my mind, is like you're repeating the exact TTPs, right? Which would maybe be more akin to a purple team. Whereas an emulate is like you're kind of acting as the threat actor. You're kind of throwing in TTPs or adding, removing things as you feel you would need to operate kind of like that threat actor would. But a lot of people are very like bullish on the definitions there, rightfully so.
As they should be, yeah, exactly.
Rightfully so. Yep. So red team tools, offensive security tools, are tools that we use for pen tests, for red team engagements, for purple teams, offensive security engagements, right? Those are the tools that we use to use in our engagements to help us achieve our goals as attackers. And they're used to provide value to organizations, right? If we're looking to try and exploit some vulnerability, a lot of times somebody has created a tool for that, or they've created an exploit. That's where the name Red Team Tools or OST or Offensive Security Tools comes in.
Yeah, and to be clear, tools don't have to only be that, right? So a lot of the tools that we use are admin tools, right? Things that live in the IT support space or the engineering space, and so the term offensive security tool is basically things that are used offensively, right? And they don't necessarily have to be created for that purpose, but we use them for such. And like you mentioned, it kind of runs the gambit from a 10-line Python script all the way back up to commercial level software that we may purchase and implement for the purpose of offensive security. So, it is kind of a loose definition, but anything that could be or is used would fall into that category.
Yep, exactly. And the white paper itself talks about this a little bit, but they talk about the dual use of OST or red team tools, which is essentially the use by legitimate threat actors or red teams, pen testers, and cyber criminals and APTs. And when you publish a security tool or you publish an OST or a red team tool on the internet, anybody can go download and use it. Anybody can go and pull the code and modify it. Anybody can kind of use that in their engagements, in their operations. So we know this happens quite a bit by both criminal gangs, cyber criminal gangs, ransomware gangs, as well as nation states. There is a number of research that indicates that both sides of that coin are using red team tools, OST that's published on GitHub. Right, everything from Cobalt Strike to Impacket to Metasploit to Sliver, PowerSploit, you name it. Virtually almost. There's a large amount, and even in this white paper, they reference some of the tools. There's a large amount of tools that are used for good and for bad. Right.
So what are your thoughts on the publication of tools that can be used for both, right? Like, I think I know the answer to this, but I think it's an interesting point of conversation when we start discussing the morality of releasing these tools to the public internet.
Yeah, it's a difficult one for me because I can see both sides of the argument. I personally don't like releasing exploitation tools if I can avoid it. I have released some exploits in the past on my GitHub for local privilege, escalation things and stuff like that. So I have done and published some of that. But I think it's difficult because you want to make something for good. And if you have something you think is really valuable that will help pen testers or red teamers validate controls or find weaknesses in organizations, there's not a good way for people to publish that information where it's not seen by the rest of the world. Right. So I don't exactly know where I sit on that fence. I lean towards kind of private disclosure and kind of keeping things more closer to the belt or to the waist or whatever the phrase is, right? Close to the chest, if you will. But I understand kind of both sides of it. Where do you think you are, Brad?
So I'm squarely in the it depends. So let me quantify it with this, right? So first of all, when we're looking at a tool, let's take Script Sentry for example. Big fan. It's something you put together. You're also giving attackers a tool that will help them move more quickly in an environment potentially, but at the same time, that ability to perform that function existed prior, right? And the way I look at it from a tool perspective is that, if you don't write it and publish it, the bad guys will, right? But they may not publish it, but they're going to have that capability. We're for the most part, new things are rare. And so I think you're doing more service to the good guys than you are than you are benefiting the bad guys, because you're now allowing administrators, IT security guys, blue teamers to have that capability, right? I don't feel the same way about exploit code. So let's differentiate that for just a second, right? Exploit code, I'm talking about like a remote code exploit that is unpublished, unknown, generally to the public. I think responsible disclosure is important. It gives the vendor an opportunity to fix the problem, and you can still get all the notoriety after the fix
Yep.
has been published, right? After a patch or whatever, an update has been released. So for folks that are dropping like POC exploits before patches on GitHub, not a fan.
Yep.
I also understand that not all companies are responsive. And so I think it gives you a little bit of leverage to force their hand if,
Yep.
say, HP, for example, who's my favorite vendor in the entire world, if they
How's that
don't
printer?
respond, well, throw it out the window, man. But yeah, if they fail to respond,
Yep.
then I think it is your duty to release that and
Yep.
get some visibility on it. So it depends, but
Yep.
at the same time, when it comes to tooling, I think everybody should have access to this stuff.
Yep.
Because here's the ultimate takeaway for me. Blue team guys have a lot less time to do this stuff than the bad guys do. They have
Yep.
unlimited money, time, and resources and people. If you give a tool like this to like I'm just script Century specifically to like an IT administrator, he can go out, run this tool, fix those issues, and move on with his life.
Yep.
And so the benefit there, I think, is more significant, at least in my opinion.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's mostly where I fall too. Is I'm definitely not a fan because the speed of exploitation we're seeing is skyrocketing. Right, a vulnerability gets released, and it used to be weeks or months before it's exploited, or even longer. Now it's
Hours,
minutes,
man. Yeah.
hours. At most a day or two. I think when Move It happened, like it was very instantaneously. And a lot of those vulnerabilities, are so trivial that once the vulnerabilities have been hinted at, even there are people reverse engineering that exploitation or that that library or whatever it is. A good example is with the certificate abuse stuff. Justin Bollinger from TrustedSec found a novel technique, a privilege escalation technique within ADCS certificate templates. And he had hinted at it. He was working with MSRC, and he had hinted at it on Twitter and stuff like that. And smart people who kind of know the ins and outs went and they probably were able to reverse it based on his little hints and stuff like that. So when there's ever a vulnerability announced or released or just even hinted at, the speed at which that's being exploited, and we're seeing those attacks in the wild, has been increasing exponentially. So that's why it's super important, I think, to make sure that you try to disclose responsibly as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also in that time frame, I think there's ways, maybe through different industry organizations or something like that other groups can get involved to disseminate some of that information ahead of time. I know this is something that Huntress is known for. I don't know if it was Move It or one of the other ones, but they had worked with MSPs that they work with to kind of feed that information through kind of the back channels, if you will. Or it seemed like, just based on conversations they had publicly, that's what they were doing, right? They were talking to MSPs and trying to help people patch ahead of time before this kind of snowballed and caught a lot of headwind. So I'm in the same boat too. I think the stuff that's like the one-click automate exploit stuff, I'm not a fan of releasing. I think it just makes it too easy for script kiddies and stuff like that. I am more okay with releasing something and having to reverse something or to figure out, the common phrase with blog posts is like that's left up to the reader to like figure out, right? You got to figure out how to exploit it. We're going to, this tool might identify it. You have to figure out how to exploit that thing or do something there. So, yeah, I'm in the same camp. Like it depends, not to be a fence sitter kind of thing, but I think there's a lot of gray area, and it's a lot of it's up for interpretation and ethical responsibilities a lot of times.
Yeah, so exactly what you just described. So when I lived in the financial world, we frequently pen tested things that were in use by hundreds or thousands of other financial institutions. And so, let's say we found, I'll pick on Jack Henry a little bit, who, by the way, is actually a really good organization. But if we found a vulnerability in one of their web apps, for example, we did not disclose that publicly. We worked with them to solve the problem. However, if we thought it was going to be a long runway, we would publish WAF rules or virtual patches, right? Or hey, change the
Yep.
config in your environment, or implement this rule in your WAF to
Yep.
protect this app. until we can solve the problem. So to your point, there are ways, there are things you can do. You can recommend, host-based intrusion rules. You can recommend different ways to protect
Yep.
yourself without disclosing the vulnerability and, like you said, giving it out to script kiddies to go take
Yep.
advantage of. So
And I think, to Microsoft's credit, I think they have, been more responsive over time. I don't submit bugs to Microsoft, but I follow people on Twitter that do, and just having conversations. It seems like some things they're hesitant to kind of fix or address at first, but, push comes to shove, it seems like there are more cases where they're taking it more seriously than not, just from a grain of salt, like outside in perspective. Yeah. It seems like that way. There's also like 0-day initiative, and there's organizations that will kind of, you can give the information to, and they'll give you a bounty or whatever, and they'll kind of figure out the stuff on the back end. So there are organizations like that can help. And Bug Bounty, I think, is a good example of that as well. Mm-hmm. But I'm definitely not a fan of kind of the clout chasing and like publishing the stuff just for notoriety or recognition, and kind of just causing mayhem. That definitely does more harm than good, without a doubt.
Yeah, no question about it, man. And you got something talking about, the clout versus value with regards to proof of concepts, and what we just described kind of outlines some alternatives that still give you the notoriety, still give you the clout and the credit, if you will, but without dropping a nuke on the industry.
Yeah, I think this, I put POC or it didn't happen in my notes. And it's like,
I saw that.
This whole idea that, whenever somebody shows like a video recording, right? And it's like POC or it didn't happen, or POC or you didn't, really exploit that thing. And it's like, I think we have to get away from that. I get it. People want to like show a fancy video of them exploiting something or doing something, whatever. But I think, to your point, showing, YAR rules or things you can signature off of, or ways to detect the abuse. Again, smart people can reverse engineer that and work backwards to an exploit, but you're not giving them the whole puzzle put together already right out of the gate. And you're not doing it for kind of vain reasons and more altruistic reasons in the end. So.
Yeah, and I'm not worried as much about smart people, right? Because smart people are going to figure out this stuff anyway. Mm-hmm. If they wanted to target move it, give them enough time, they'll figure out a way to do it. Yep. I'm more worried about the dumb criminals, right? The ones who are out there just slinging this stuff everywhere, shutting hospitals, and there was a case in Western Europe where the organization that said they would never target hospitals ended up doing it by accident, and they encrypted the entire hospital, shut them all down, and then they apologized for it afterwards. Those are the kind of people I don't want to push plug and play proof of concepts to.
Yep. Yeah, the last thing I think that's important that this white paper by Trend and the research they did kind of alludes to or talks about briefly is the supply chain of OST, of red team tools. So many of these tools are open source. They're built on open source libraries and open source maintainers. And we've seen this with Python. We've seen this with so many different things. What was the project that was like the whole China backdoor thing? I forget what it was called.
Oh yeah, it was an open source library, right?
Yeah, mm-hmm. I'm drawing a blank what it was, but everybody is probably familiar with those. Well, red team tools can have those issues too. I think, was it Sliver was one of the C2 frameworks that had some vulnerabilities in it. Credit to those guys. They patched it and they addressed it. But that software is not immune to vulnerabilities and to issues, right? So this is something that threat actors know as well, right? So if I can just why hack an organization when I can just backdoor all the tools that the red teams are using or that the pen testers are using, all right? So the more open source tools that we have, the more offensive security tools we have, the more it gets very important to kind of audit and kind of know and understand, hence the shirt, know what your tools are doing, know what exploits are doing before you run them. And that's something that I think is particularly important, especially teaching new people to new programmers or new pen testers to look at code and not just run code off of GitHub. It sounds really self-explanatory, but I know people are just git cloning and pwning.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also incredibly inconvenient, right? And so you pull down something like Ping Castle, and I would say, and this is an unpopular opinion, so I get that, but these open source tools, generally, these open source projects, I'll say it that way, generally don't do a super good job of vetting their contributors. And so that is one of the reasons that we have seen an uptick in this kind of supply chain compromise in these open source toolkits is, you know, it's an alias on GitHub.
Yep.
And then you get brought onto the project because you make a couple of good contributions, and then your fourth or fifth commit is really quietly a backdoor. And
Yep.
so, which is exactly what happened, by the way. And so, yeah, man. Obviously, knowing your tools is a burden, but it's something we have to take seriously. And so, I have been bitten by this before. I will admit. I was doing a pen test on a hospital a long time ago, and some of the tooling that I was running had some aspects to it that I was unaware of. I got a
Yep.
call from their blue team in the middle of the night, like, "Hey, dude, why is your laptop doing XYZ on our network?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry," And so, fortunately, it wasn't malicious, but it was unknown to me, which was a problem.
Yep.
And that was a big takeaway from me. Like, I'm never going to run anything I'm not intimately
Yep.
familiar with again, which is why I encourage everyone to do the same.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the tools that blue teamers use to detect malware, to like triage an application, like any run and what's it called? Mail search, I think, is one that the trend research references. But there's definitely a need for tools or products that can analyze these tools, right? Check for backdoors, check for strange network connections, all that stuff. But that's an important thing, and something that is just become second nature for me when I'm looking at a tool, right? I'm not going to run anything that I can't see the code most of the time, right? And that's for a very good reason, right? Because of what you just talked about, right? There could be some base64 encoded thing that you didn't realize was just making a network connection and it's downloading something, or it's got some reverse shell built into it, super trivial, but just kind of lying there in the weeds.
Yeah.
But for those listening who are on kind of like the pen test and red team side of things, I think it's important to always review the code, make sure you know what's in it and what it's doing, both from kind of like the security standpoint, like making sure there's no backdoors or weird stuff happening, but also just knowing, what the tool is going to do, right? That gets into like, do I understand how the tool, like Nmap, like, do I understand how a SYN scan works versus a different type of scan? Or, do I understand how this tool is creating a Kerberos ticket or whatever the tool might be? Knowing it is just going to help you understand it better, and it's going to be able to help you identify when there's issues and helps you troubleshoot and all that stuff on top of the security implications, right?
So yeah, man, you nailed it. I was actually going to bring that up if you didn't cover it, but yeah, I mean, understanding how your stuff works, because that some of these tools are destructive, right? Some of these tools can tear things up, and so there are a lot of automated exploit platforms out there that, for that reason, I am just not a fan of, right?
Mhm.
Like Metasploit's a great example, and don't get me wrong, I'm not poo-pooing on Metasploit. If you know how to use it well, it's a fantastic tool. But if you're one of those guys who click through the run all exploits on all targets, kind of thing, you can really do some damage to environments. We had a number of years ago, if you're not familiar with SQL Map, it is an automated SQL injection, exploitation, and discovery tool, and it is brutal. Like, it will tear stuff up. And we ended up corrupting a database in a client's environment using
Mhm.
SQL Map, and it was unrecoverable. So yeah, man, know your tools.
Yeah.
And these automated, like, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks platforms, man, they're just scary for that reason. They'll tear stuff up.
Yep. Yeah. So that's really all I have for this article, this white paper. I thought it was a good read. As I kind of perused through it, there was some really good topics kind of discussed in it. Like I said, they have Trend has developed kind of a methodology for identifying suspicious repositories or ones to look at more closely. but I think this is something that will continue to grow and develop. I think, putting on my crystal ball hat or whatever, or looking at a crystal ball, I would imagine that there would be, it would be very intriguing to have some open source tools or commercial tools for the purpose of analyzing these OSTs. These are red team tools for various things. But nonetheless, it was a good read. It was a good introduction to this topic. I don't think we've really talked about like red team tools and OST in this way before on the podcast.
Right.
So definitely go check out the research by Trend and look at that because I think it was really good.
Yeah, it's the red team tools in the hands of cyber criminals and nation states, put out by Trend Micro. So it's a recent release. So encourage you guys to go check that out. And that's all that we have time for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. If you like what we're doing, like, subscribe. Most importantly, share it with your peers and let people know what we have going on here. And we'll see you next Wednesday.